Hello, Dreamcatchers, and welcome to another day in the Writers Haven. We are shooting live at the 2018 Black Authors and Readers Rock Weekend, and I am here today with the incomparable Victor McGlothin. Victor is an author, a screenwriter and filmmaker slash director producer, and he has written several books, total of 16, although I heard it was more than that, 20. So it doesn't matter. He's just a great, fabulous writer. His latest book, Backsliders, as well as The Writing Coach. And Victor has also done a body of work in film. So we want to also discuss that and ensure that not only our authors, but our filmmakers are able to glean a lot of really great golden nuggets from his experience in both areas. So, Victor, how are you enjoying the bar weekend so far?
It's great to be here. It's a big deal. There used to be so many of these types of events in the United States, but with the closure of so many African American bookstores, there are just so few of them now. So instead of maybe 100 or so, now there's only about 15 or 16 throughout the country. So this is a big deal being here.
Okay, and how has the closing of the African American owned bookstores impacted authors, black authors, who I know, as you said, have done a lot of events at those types of venues? And now with the closing, how has that impacted your ability to promote your books?
Okay, so imagine if you were a performer and you had to go on the road, and whether it was stand up or singing, and you had 100 venues that you could hit every year. That's how you made your money, and 85 of them closed down. So the money fell off, support fell off. The only saving grace really was the internet. And now you can promote yourself on the internet when you could not years ago. So it's not the same because just like I almost said R. Kelly, like a musical, like a musician or a singer who hits the road, um, has to go out and get his or her face in front of their fans in order to sell, their product. It has to be done. Like Beyonce and Jay-Z were just in Dallas and it was sold out and everybody's talking about it. And my son said, they're billionaires. Why do they still need to tour? And I said, because they want to continue being billionaires. If they stop touring, their numbers would fall off, and someone else would fill that vacuum. And the customers or the fans who want to see and touch, their stars, they want to be able to reach out and do that. If you don't tour, they can't. So then they'll follow someone else.
So that's why events like the Black Authors and Readers Rock, as well as the National Book Club Conference that's held in Atlanta, are so important for authors. And also, it's an opportunity for authors to really get to know their readers and talk to them. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's so important to connect because again, if you don't, I've seen some writers do it. I've been doing this 20 years. They'll start out and the trend will be lit, either church lit or street lit, and they'll follow the trend and they'll get away from their normal writing pattern and style that has drawn all of their readers to them, and the readers will fall off and say, okay, your books weren't like the ones that we liked, so they don't buy them anymore. So without that connection and readers being very upfront saying, you know what, I liked it better when you were writing these other kind of books. I don't like these new books. They would tell you to your face. And I think if you listen and you're open and you hear it enough, then it'll sink in. It'll sink in. But I've seen people's whole careers just fall off because they decided to chase the trend, whatever was hot.
So, staying on the course of promoting your work, how have book publishers, are you still with Kensington?
No. I left Kensington after my last 5 book deal, and then I went with Hachette for a 2 book deal. And over the last 3 years, I self published 3 books, 2 novels, and the writing coach myself. I didn't even present them to major publishers. I wanted to put my product out the way I wanted it and said I can always go back to being published, which I'll probably start looking into next year.
And I'm finding that to be a growing trend as well, because you've built a name for yourself and you've built a fan base. And so, for an author like you, it's easy to then go out and self-publish your books, and so a lot of those funds, the what you make, the profit off of the book will go directly to you, as opposed to being split out in these different ways that the publisher would ordinarily do it. But I want to go back to something that you said about promoting the book, and what I had asked about the publishers and how they're promoting your work. Do you find that for the genre of writing that you do, that let's talk about in the early phases of your writer journey, did you find that the promoting the book with your main publisher was something that was equally done, or there was some equities in how they promoted your work and your genre versus others that were under the same brand?
Right, which is a very good question because a lot of people don't know that you get an advance to write the book, which is half of whatever. If they give you $100,000, they'll pay you 50,000 up front, and when the book is released, they'll pay you the other, or when it's upon completion, they'll pay you another 50,000 or whatever is left on that balance. What I learned was, if sometimes the publishing houses would take a new author and say, we'll bring them along slowly. We're not going to give them a tour. So they would expect you to take whatever money they gave you and use that part of your tour. While other people that they wanted to really get behind, or one who's built a name for themselves, they would give them 100, 200, whatever amount of money, $1,000, and they would send them on tour, give them a 5 or 10 city tour, and they pay for their airfare and hotel, and to have someone pick them up from the airport and manage every part of the tour. When I found that out, I said, I tell you what, give me the money and I'll decide, because when I started getting big checks, I found out that I was still not being toured. And I said, how do you expect me to get out there and bring in the numbers like other people are doing if you're not going to support me with a tour? And they said, because you're already doing it. So yeah, we fell out about that. And I left the publishing house over that and chose another one. Hmm. Right.
That's incredible. Do you find, well, first of all, let's make sure that the dream catchers know the genre of writing that you're in. So you've done historical fiction, suspense, thrillers, or suspense?
Mystery suspense. Right, because I'll write a whodunit when the readers know who done it, but the characters in the story don't know. And then there's always a twist. And yes, I write the kind of stories where women fall in love, the guy is dashing and powerful and tragically flawed, and then a body's gonna drop. So in almost all of my books, somebody dies. So when people have read me from the beginning, they'll say, "I heard you had a new book coming out. Is somebody gonna die?" And I'm like, "Yeah, somebody's gonna die." So
Someone died in Backslider?
a lot of people died at Backsliders.
Okay, so let's talk a bit about your process, because you said scripted, and that's usually a term for filmmaking. So let's start with your writing, your author writing. So what is your process? How do you engage? How do you jump into it
Okay. Usually I start.
in 90 days?
Okay, so before I actually start the 90-day writing process, I outline, because just like when in school, before you start a book project, you should use an outline. I know we all hated them, the Roman numerals and the sub numerals and the letters, and we hated it. But so I don't use that. What I do is a line item outline, almost like a grocery list. What are the things I'm gonna need when I go to the grocery store? And I write all those things down. So it's like, okay, I name the characters, 4 or 5 major characters. I name their occupations. I just name them. I just write it out. I don't get in depth. I don't dig deep initially, and then I talk about how they relate to each other. And then I name 25 things that happen in the story. First thing that happens, last thing that happens, and I fill in the blank. And it doesn't have to be in any chronological order, but they all have to be there. And of course, once you start writing, other things, populate and fill in. But I have a complete snapshot of my novel before I ever get started.
And how long does that process usually take?
As long it depends on when I want to start writing the book. Usually, I start 30 days out. So within 30 days, I do what I call seasoning. I start listening to dialogue I might hear on the radio. I might, walk through downtown and hear people talking about stuff, and I'll say, I like the way they said that. So I'll take something I heard someone say and make either a character out of what they just said, or just build around that and make a whole scene out of what I heard somebody say on the street. And the funny thing is, Sam Cooke used to write all his music that way. Because they ask him, how do you stay current and how do you use? He started listening to people, in the juke joints. I listen to people when I'm at the food counter. I listen to people. I hear it. He said music's all around you if you just listen. So good dialogue is around you if you just listen. Yeah.
Okay, so once you have outlined, you do your character development, and I noticed you said that you'll just write down a few things at first. So do the characters fully develop as you're writing, or do you put more meat on those bones before you actually engage in the writing?
Yeah, no, believe me, it's a skeleton. I might have four or five types of things that the character might say, or the style in which they speak or dress, but I try to leave it as simple as possible so I can fill it in. Because a lot of times when you start writing the story, you say, okay, I'm starting to notice that these are this character's flaws. He doesn't see in himself that he is a follower by not by design but by choice. And then his family is noticing that he's the leader of the household. He's very strong in everything else he does, but when this one guy comes around, he immediately kind of takes a backseat to the alpha male. And at the end of the story, he realizes that that's true, but he also realizes, and his family realizes, that's by choice, because he could go and bump, up against the alpha male all the time, but he admires the alpha male, and that's who the story's about. So, and that's why he's a deacon and not the pastor. Yeah.
Did you say and not the pastor,
Right. And
and
not the
not the
pastor.
pastor, not the pastor? Okay, so you have your characters. We heard about your process, and then you start writing. Now, so where did this concept of 90 days come from? Is it that you just started writing and you just noticed, hey, I can do this in 90 days. I don't need a year. You've heard other authors talk about writing a book for a year, 2 years. Some of them say I still have to live and experience things before I can finish that book. So, they have lots of different reasons. Tell me how 90 days became your target for completing your books.
Right. That's a very good question. My first book took a year and a half. My second novel took 90 days. I'm sorry, 9 months. And then, just by chance, one of the local Delta chapters in Dallas said, "Hey, we have a group of girls that are 9 and 10 years old, and we want you to do a writers workshop." I was like, "I'm gonna do a writers workshop for children." She said, "Well, just make it simple. Make it something so simple that a 9 or 10 year old girl could do it." And I sat down and said, "Okay, well then I would start," which is what I was doing, and didn't realize it. Well, I would start with some character development. I would write, 10 things about how the story gets started. You need to know your beginning and your ending, and I would just start there. Once I wrote it out, I was like, "Oh my God, this is it." So I started using what I wrote for 9 and 10 year old girls, and it worked. And it started taking what I did from that took 9 months, the last book, to 90 days. So I realized, depending on 75,000 to 105,000 words, I can crush it in 90 days. Yeah, I mean, wait a minute, it's gonna be nonstop. So you after work, sometimes before work, sometimes at work, you're writing. With every book, I gain about 15 to 20 pounds. I do. I gain about 15, 20 pounds with every book. And then after the book, I have to hit the gym and start running and work it off.
So, on average, how many pages would you say that you write in a day when you're on your 90-day tour?
Some days I write 4 pages. Some days I think the most I've written were 22 pages. So that's like two full chapters. Start in the morning, start writing in your PJs, and get a bite to eat. Maybe leave the house and go maybe to the grocery store. Come back and it's like, okay, I'm done. And it's like, I got to start this other chapter. I'm just gonna start. And I'm married and I've been married for 22 years. And it's like, honey, I'm just gonna start this chapter and then we can go to the movies. And next thing you know, it's 1 o'clock in the morning. She went to the movies with somebody else, and she's coming back, and I'm like, you ready to go? She's like, dude, it's 1 o'clock in the morning, and the movie was good. You should have been there. So sometimes you get caught up, and when I mean, because I get emotional. I live the story while I'm writing the story, and so when you get into it, some days maybe 4 pages is all you have, and I'm happy to get when it's only 4 pages in me. I'll put it out, but I always tell especially new writers, when the literary muses give that to you, when you are blessed with something to write down, you need to write it down. You got to get it out, because when you decide, okay, I'm busy right now, but I'll do it later, it's never going to come back as clear. It's never going to come back as fresh as when those literary gods first gave it to you. Yeah.
That's a very, very, very good point. Are you editing while you're writing?
Never. because what happens is for people who edit while they write, they get stuck, and they'll tell me, "Hey man, I'm writing this book, and 3 pages or 30 pages in, I'm stuck." It's like, okay, well, and I told them to use an outline, and some say yes, some say no, but they get caught up in what's happening in the story, and they want to go back and make it perfect. Write the book, and after the book is finished, you have the rest of your life to edit it. But what happens is a lot of people get stuck in that writing process because they try to edit as they go. It's hard for you to continue to move forward in anything that you do when you're stuck in the now. And so I tell them, stop, just stop. Stop trying to make it perfect as you're writing it. And the ones who listen finish their novels. The ones who don't have a novel that's unfinished 10 years later when I see them. Sometimes I see them on the road. I'm in Detroit. Hey, man, I started writing that book 10 years ago. Remember we talked about that? I'm like, oh, that's right. The guy that was working in an auto shop. And yeah, yeah. So how did it turn out? Man, I'm still writing it because I'm still editing. Because he trying to edit as he writes. It's like, you got to let it go. And he said, you told me that 10 years ago. Still didn't listen.
That's some excellent advice. Thank you very much for that, Victor. Thank you. Okay, so let's talk about your nonfiction work. Okay, so your fiction work, the way that you've discussed your process is how you approach all of them. Is it the same for your nonfiction work?
Nonfiction is difficult because it's almost like I'm trying to prove a point when I do nonfiction. Um, the writing coach, how to start fast and finish. Because what I realized that a lot of people who want to write a book, and of course, I've been doing this 20 years, so everywhere I go, you meet people, I want to write a book, or can you write a book about me? My life is so fabulous, or my life is so terrible. Somebody needs to tell my story. And I'll say, write it yourself. But of course, I'm in an airport or at a book signing or at a restaurant. I can't really get into all of that, and I'm not trying to have my email box flooded with people who are not serious about writing. They're only serious about talking about writing, and there is a difference. Because yeah, so when you run into people that love to talk about writing but don't want to write, it drives me crazy because I don't have a lot of time to be sitting around talking to thousands of people about it. So what I did was with the writing coach is I charge $50 an hour to coach people who are either thinking about writing a project or working on a project. Sometimes we'll sit there for 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, and I will take your money. I will take that check, cash. I got my card swiper. I'm gonna get that money, and I'm gonna sit, and we're gonna talk about, and we're gonna do the same process that I do. We're gonna talk about your major characters. We're gonna talk about all the things that happen in the story. We're gonna list them out and run them out. So when I started writing the writing coach, I said I'm going to put into this book everything that I charge people $50 an hour for, and make it a $12 book and put it on Amazon, so that people who are serious about writing can go and get it, spend $12 and read it, and know everything I know about writing, or pay me $50 an hour, and we can sit there until they get tired of paying me. So my process for writing this type of book is not to lay it out, but to just talk about almost what's interesting, the questions that people ask me. How will this benefit the reader? People who are serious, if they take this, what could they do with it? So it's almost like an interview. It's almost like I interview myself for those projects. What's important? How will it affect the reader? Why am I doing it? And that helps me fill in the blanks.
Okay. Now, historical fiction. I'm sorry. Historical fiction. Your approach, I'm pretty sure it's the same as any. I mean, your approach is the same as the fiction writing that you do for any of your other books. But what caused you to have an interest in writing historical fiction? What about other periods interest you so much that I counted 3 books that there may be others, but tell me what is the intrigue with that?
Um, I was born in the 60s. Black and white TV is all you had for most part of that. I love stories that were set in the 40s. I like the clothes and the music, and especially late 40s after World War II was the first time you had African American males coming back from war who had been fighting and dying side by side with white people, and they came back and they wanted that equality more than ever, and they felt like I fought for it, I deserve it. But you had America that was really slow to change, and they couldn't, politicians couldn't believe that these black people who before the war knew their place, and they came back and demanded a new place after World War II. Everything was changing. You had black people coming out of the South, going to Chicago, going to Los Angeles, going to Detroit, working in the car shops, working in the airplane, plants. they were making the same amount of money as white people. So now they had the kind of money to buy the types of homes that white people lived in and the types of communities. And some of them, of course, wanted to live in white communities. And big city leaders said no, but we're going to make sure that you have something just as nice way on the other side of town. And then some of those communities flourished. And it was just, so I love the late 40s, early 50s. So some of the stories, most of the stories I write happen then. But two comments on your questions. Um, I research at least 2 months before I write historical fiction. I read everything I can get my hands on the internet, at the library, about that timepiece. What, like I said, the kinds of clothes they wore, being able to explain a woman's hat from the 40s, or a dress, or the seams, or the buttons, things that people don't think about, but I want to put people there. I read Walter Mosley's Devil in a Blue Dress before the movie came out, and I mean, I was in awe of how you walk into a room and somebody's cooking bacon and grits, and you could smell the bacon and grits, and you could tell how if you put cheese on the eggs. And I was just, man, it was like, you know what, that's right, you need to feed the senses in a historical fiction novel more than normally, because you got to keep people in that period.
Well, that is pretty powerful when you can induce the reader with these stories, and they really actually start to believe that what they're reading is true to form. So, along those lines, how difficult is it to write in a woman's voice? You touched on it a little bit last night in your workshop, but let's talk a little bit about that for our dream catchers.
Okay. um what's funny is now, when I think about how I had to begin this, because my first book, it was almost all male characters, and the women characters, or the female characters, were kind of only there to stand in when the men weren't talking. It's like there were police officers, and there was kind of a men.
I'm so glad you fixed that.
And really, I'm telling you, I just, because I hung out with a lot of guys. One or two women are around when you're hanging out with a lot of guys. So yeah, how it fits, I didn't know how to make it fit. I was just telling a story. When the first draft came out, and I let someone from a book club read it, and they said, "You need more women." I said, "Well, there's no room for any more women." And they said, "Well, you need to develop the women in the story more." Because right now I think it's a good story, but it's about a bunch of guys.
They're just props.
Right, exactly. That's what it was. They were just props to tell the story, and I was like, okay, well then how could I do that? And they were like, well, in this scene, maybe she could, talk about her dress, or talk about, things that are important to a woman, or why does he stay gone so long, or these 2 day long poker games, and all this men stuff. There needs to be a woman or she needs to be more developed in the middle. So I went back and thought about it, and it was right. But then I realized I did not know how to write in a woman's voice. I could attribute things to them. They say things like a woman would say them, or I think a woman would say them, right? And then I realized, wait a minute, I have to go back and I start watching, and there wasn't a lot of black shows on then. So I was like watching the Cosby Show, or any show that had black people on it. I was running to the TV, to watch. Okay, she said this, and how did this work, and what was her response? So I had to start paying attention to how women responded to dialogue they liked and didn't like, or if it was dialogue from a loved one or a lover, how would they respond? So all of the things that happen all around us that we just don't pay attention to, I had to start studying. And then I would start listening to every female conversation I heard, from maybe leaving my house or my mom's house on the weekend, between my mother and sister and aunts, all the way through the grocery stores and at work. Every time women were talking, I would kind of slow down, do whatever I was doing, get a little ear hustle on, because I had to learn how they talked and how they responded. It was hard. So now I'm like, and she said, you need to bring your behind home at night, and I can't believe you said, so now I can run it like a woman, because I paid attention enough that I can attribute those words and those sentiments to females. So for the woman who is, prim and proper, who never does anything wrong in public, and always can correct other people, I can mimic her style of talking. But then that type of woman, you guarantee in my book, she gonna have a flip side, and when she's by herself or with another clique, she gonna show her true self. And so characters will be like, in public she's this way, and in private she's another way. Like most people who are self-righteous, there's always a downfall on its way.
Right, right. And, that's so true, and the challenge is real, especially when if you're as a woman and I'm writing in a male voice, and when people have read. what I've written, they're like, a dude wouldn't say it like that. I mean, because it's kind of, I guess, in some way romanticized. It's how we would want our man to talk, right? Not necessarily how they might, um, relay a message to you if you're staying true to the character. If you've developed the character and you've developed, how their personality is, and then so now you got to write from that, and there is definitely a challenge in that. So thank you very much for sharing for our dream catchers that are males who are writing female voices.
No, but I'm sorry. I'm glad you brought that up about women writing in a man's voice because a lot of times, and I didn't think about it from your perspective because most of the fiction writers have been female, and a lot of them just get it right. So I hadn't thought about how difficult it must be, but I remember early on in the late '90s when I first started writing, and you had a lot of other new writers, many who were female, and they would write the dialogue, and I would say that a man would say that. And they was like, "Yeah, he would." I was like, "No, not a straight man." Yeah, not a. If this is a straight man in a relationship between a man and a woman, he's not gonna be talking to her like this because he looks like he wants to do her hair, not do her. Yes, yes. Hmm.
Okay, so what would you say inspired you to write? Just from the very beginning, where you put pen to paper, what inspired that process?
I wanted to do film. I wanted to do film, and I said I could write. I could tell stories. I could, sit down at a dinner table and just make up a story and throw characters in, and people like, oh my goodness, again, when did this happen? And I said, I just made it up, and they would never believe me. That's you went too deep into the characters into the story. You couldn't have just made this up on the fly. I'm like, yeah, I did because I could do that, and I think it's from watching so much television from a young age. When I should have been reading, I was watching TV. I mean, excuse me, you're talking about every single day watching television for when I wasn't playing outside, I was watching TV. I was watching Alfred Hitchcock movies, and yeah, yeah, right. When I was 5, 6 years old, my mother would go to sleep, and I'd roll right back out of bed after she went to sleep, go in, turn that big black and white console on. Turn it down low, sit real close, and hear the entire story. And usually by the end of it, I could tell you who done it because I'd seen so many of these formulas. By the time I was 8, 9 years old, then you had a lot of black exploitation films come out, and Shaft and Return to Shaft and Shaft in Africa and all this other stuff. Yeah, I remember those days.
Was that a real show?
Yeah, it was a real movie. What was difficult with those is they weren't following the same formulas that all of these historical black and white films and right, the traditional stuff. They weren't following those formulas, so it would throw me off. And I was like, no, he's the guy that was supposed to do it. You can't just throw in, bring somebody in halfway through the movie and make that be the villain. That's not the way it works. And people are like, yeah. And I'm sitting there in the movie at 12 years old, like this is wrong. This is not how it's supposed to go. But I learned. So with every different generation comes in a different way of storytelling. So I try to infuse what I learned from a kid growing up, but also throwing twist in there, bringing in characters where when a character comes in after a third through the movie, why are they here? How did they just come in, and how are they going to wreck this or fix this? Because when someone comes in that late, it's to bring some kind of drama.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, well, great. Well, thank you so much, Victor, for coming over to the Haven Corner at this year's 2018 Black Authors and Readers Rock Weekend. And Dreamcatchers, I hope that you enjoyed this segment of our show. Thank you for joining us. And until next time, catch fire on purpose.